Here.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Here.
Mr. Kaltsunis?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Ms. Koopa?
We do have quorum for tonight, and at this point in time, before I call on Vice Chairman Eisenbacher to read the rules and procedures, I'll just identify everyone up here for the sake of the public viewing at home or here in the audience tonight. To my left, your right in the audience, Mr. Lambert, and to his right is Vice Chairman David Eisenbacher. I'm Glenn Clark, the chairman of this body. This is Mr. Desmond, Mr. Agawas. This is Mr. Kaltsunis, who is an alternate on this board, appointed by Troy City Council, but as a seated member, as an alternate, he will be a full voting member of this board here tonight. And then on the side dais is Mr. Evans, who represents the city administration and serves as in a support capacity here to the board. And at the very end is Mr. Motzny, who is by day as assistant city attorney for the city of Troy, and at this board he serves as our legal advisor. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
Thank you. The Zoning Board of Appeals is a group of 7 of your neighbors appointed by City Council to decide on requests for variances and other matters that are brought before them. A variance is a relaxation of the literal provisions of the zoning ordinance. Petitioners must indicate a hardship or practical difficulty with the land that would warrant the granting of the variance. Procedure. The board will hear the items in the order they appear on the agenda. When an item is called, the chairman will verify that the petitioner is present. Then the city administration will summarize the facts of the case. The petitioner will then be given an opportunity to address the board to explain the justification for the action requested. After the petitioner makes their presentation and answers any questions that the board may have, the chairman will open the public hearing. Any person wishing to speak on the request should raise their hand, and when recognized by the chairman, come up to the podium. The speaker should identify themselves with name and address, indicate their relationship to the property in question, for example, next door neighbor, live behind the property, etc., and state whether they are in favor of or against the variance request, and give reasons for their opinion. Comments must be directed through the chairman. Comments should be kept as brief as possible and closely pertain to the matter under consideration. Only one person will be recognized by the chairman to speak at one time. At the conclusion of public comments, the chairman will close the public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, no other public comment will be taken unless in response to a specific question by a member of the board. The board will then make a motion to approve, deny, or postpone the request. In order for the request to pass, a minimum of 4 votes are needed. If the request is not granted, the applicant has the right to appeal the board's decision to Oakland County Circuit Court.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Eisenbacher. Let the record reflect that Ms. Koopa has joined the board, so we now have a full seated board tonight. And we do have item number 3 now, which is approval of the minutes related to our last business meeting in July 18th, 2017. Are there any questions, concerns, or a motion that someone would like to make? Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes.
Motion for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Desmond, seconds. Any discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, we're prepared to vote.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Koopa?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes. Motion passes, and we are on to item number 4 related to the agenda. Are there any concerns or questions or comments from a member of the board? Seeing that there are no comments from a member of the board on this, the agenda as printed and presented to the public is our official agenda for tonight's meeting. So we move right on to items for hearings, and we move on to 5A. Mr. Evans, can you present related to 565 Ottawa?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to direct everyone's attention to the monitors at the front of the room. This is a variance request for 565 Ottawa. This matter was last heard by the board at their July 18th meeting, where it was postponed. The subject property is in a single-family residential area on the north side of Ottawa. That neighborhood is north of Square Lake and east of Livernois. There's an aerial of the subject property, and I've zoomed in further. Now, the subject matter involves the proposed construction of a detached garage and the applicant is requesting 2 variances. Now, the first one involves the square footage, the grounds, the floor area of the detached garage, and this is the plot plan submitted by the applicant. At the bottom is Ottawa. I've circled the location of the proposed garage there at the top, and that's a close-up. So regarding the allowable area, the zoning ordinance limits the allowable area of the garage to 2,888 square feet. The applicant's proposing the garage be 3,106 square feet in size. So that's the first variance. The second variance involves the height of the proposed garage. The ordinance limits the height of the garage to 14 feet. The applicant originally proposed the garage to be 18 feet 1/2 inch in height, but has since revised that since our last meeting and now is proposing a height of 15 feet 8.5 inches. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So at this point in time, we did entertain a motion to postpone, well, to cap the height of the garage. And I'm going to let Mr. Evans kind of just give us a quick overview of what that motion stated. But then there was a motion to postpone it to a future meeting. So that's going to become our active motion for the board tonight, since it was moved properly and seconded properly, and became a motion owned by the body, which means we either have to, well, you essentially have to dispose of the motion in one fashion or another. Mr. Evans?
Right. Mr. Chairman, there was a motion and a second to grant the floor area request.
Right. The floor, so the size of the garage
Right.
regarding the footprint.
The footprint, correct.
And then, so that's been approved.
That motion.
That was part of the motion to also allow or cap the height, correct? They weren't separate motions.
No, there was only one motion made, and the motion was to grant the floor area request. There was no motion made relative to the
Okay, that's
Height.
great. Mr. Lambert, is that what your recollection? Yes, okay. So that is now before us. And Mr. Evans said that the petitioner obviously has brought forward new plans. So at this point in time, we can recall the petitioner to the board, to the or to the podium, to tell us why we should consider this. But we also, once again, we do have an active motion before us, which we're going to get to here in just a moment. So, good evening. Could you identify yourself and tell us your relationship to the property?
Yes, my name is Matt Randall, and I'm the builder, and this is my client, John Spreitzer.
Good evening.
So, anyway, so you have the good news that he has found a way to go from 48 inches, and then now we're looking to go to 20 inches. So, and he's done that, well, he's done that in a number of ways. Number one, the hoist that he currently owns, that's like 13 and a half. That's what we needed before. Well, now he's able to, he's actually got a low pro hoist he's going to buy. That one is 12 feet. So we've made quite a bit of headway there. We've also taken the Energy Heel truss. You know, we've minimized that because I guess insulation is, you'd rather have the whole package than the high-end insulation package. So between the Energy Heel truss and the low pro hoist, we're able to come down to 20 inches opposed to the 48 we last were petitioning for. So, and I just have something that just kind of gives a little perspective, because I don't know if you know, but this is just what
Can you, sir, step back to the microphone, and why don't you ask your client to do that? And if you could speak into the microphone while he's showing it around.
Yeah.
We need to capture this on the public record.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, he's just going to show you the what the proportional looks like.
Thank you. And if you, can we have this for the record? Sure. If you can hand it to Mr. Evans, thank you.
Good job.
So yeah, like he said, I went through and did as much research as I could on trying to find something that was a lot more, shorter, frankly. We're taking the one I had. It was a used one out of the other garage I use in Madison Heights currently to work on my projects and whatnot. I am not, just want to reiterate, not in the landscaping business. This garage is not used for business. I'm in the restaurant business, so it's primarily used for, like I said, hobbies of mine and spend time with my family at home. I currently travel to and from Madison Heights at a garage I have there to do any work that I have to do. It has all my tools and everything there, and I'd rather not do it there. I'd rather do it in my own home with my own family. Spend time with my kids and my son, and so I've tried my best to get this down as low as absolutely possible to make it almost, I hope, not as big of an issue for you guys. So I'd really like to, I really think that the height of this garage versus my house is reasonable. It's actually going to be shorter than most of the garages around me now. Yeah.
Okay, any questions for this petitioner from a member of the board? Mr. Lambert?
Just one question, and that would be, one of the things that we have to look at, or the major issue we have to look at in granting a variance, is the practical difficulty with the property that would give us some leeway in order to grant the variance. Obviously, the size of the building is understandable because you have a huge piece of property, so I think that gives us a lot of leeway as far as that's concerned. But as far as the height, what kind of practical difficulty do you believe that we should use as our rationale for approving the height of the building?
Well, I'd go the opposite, the practical difficulty versus like the neighborhood. It's a unique neighborhood in Troy, that's for sure, right? So the lots are large, it's completely treed in, and I can understand where, obviously you have to protect some of the houses, the neighbors from, some of these really large garages in a small neighborhood where the communities are right on top of each other. I mean, you can't really even see this garage anywhere. So do I have a practical difficulty? No, I wouldn't say that. But I would have to think that this specific area of Troy is kind of unique. And I know you guys made the rule set and the laws specifically for the majority of Troy, but this specific neighborhood just isn't like the rest. And I'd like to, maybe you guys could look at it from a different sense, maybe in the fact that it is a unique area of Troy, and that's all I really have.
Wouldn't it be fair to say that the practical difficulty is that he can't really use if it were to fall under the ordinance, he can't really use it the way he's intending to live on his property? I feel like it's kind of governing him to say, you can have this hobby, but not this hobby. And I know we said before about, well, where do you draw the line? Does somebody have an indoor, bungee facility? But I think we draw the line at what people really want to do. It seems like it's a reasonable request, I guess.
Thank you.
I think the bungee thing was my analogy, perhaps.
It was a great idea, but I've never seen one. If you build one, let me know.
So can you just, so let me just ask Mr. Evans. So the original request was 18 and a half, or 18, no, it was, the new one, it's 18 and one half inch, right?
Well, the new
Just looking-
midpoint is 20 inches greater, so the new midpoint is
15.8.
Yeah, it's 15.8. Yeah. So
And
20
it was originally 20 something, 20 and a quarter, or 20,
18 feet 1/2 inch was the original proposed height.
and it is now then what?
15.8.
15 and what?
8. So 20 inches, 0.5.
So the way is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Okay, if you could both have a seat. Thank you very much. The way I envision that this can go, and I'm not instructing anyone in what way should be, but since we have an active motion, somebody could move, or we can vote right on that motion and dispose of it one way or another, or someone can move to amend the motion and put new information in there, and then that becomes, if that's approved, that becomes the main motion. So it changes the original motion too. That may be hard to follow that bouncing ball, but that's essentially what it does. Mr. Lambert had his hand up first.
Just a procedure question. I don't know if staff can tell us if we need to reopen the public hearing or not on this.
Mr. Motzi.
We've had the required public hearing, so it's not necessary, but it's the chair's discretion whether the chair would like to reopen the public hearing.
We do have a lengthy agenda tonight, so I'm just going to ask the members of the public that are here, if anyone is here on this issue other than the petitioner and his representative, please raise your hand. Seeing that we're without anyone who would like to speak to it, I think we can dispense of that. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
Okay. I had the same point as Mr. Lambert. In light of the discussion that you just had about it, I would like to propose an amendment to the motion that is on the table to include the variance for the garage height to be 15 feet, 8 inches. As the petitioner, or is that?
15 feet, 8.5 inches.
Okay.
So that's what you,
Well, let's just say 15 feet, 9 inches. We don't need to be.
okay.
If that requires a second, I'll second it.
Is that full your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Moved and seconded by Eisenbacher Desmond. Any discussion on that amendment? Seeing that there isn't any discussion, I think we're prepared for a vote. Mr. Evans?
Mr. Desmond,
This is to grant, correct?
this is to grant.
This
yes.
is to alter the original motion,
Okay. Yes.
add this in, and then we're going to have a second vote, which is essentially a combo of
right.
both.
Then yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Ms. Koopa,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Gauss.
Yes.
Okay, now on to the main motion, which is essentially, I'm sorry, that is approved. So what you're asking?
Yes, if I may have some discussion on that.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The one thing I'd like to point out in terms of the practical difficulty, first practical difficulty that appears to me is that the property is extremely large, and this garage size is not imposing compared to the property and compared to the houses in the surrounding neighborhood. In terms of the height, the hardship is being able to use the garage at all. It's a reasonable request for use, and that reasonable request for use isn't accommodated by our zoning ordinance.
Any other discussion on the main motion? Mr. Lambert?
I was somewhat skeptical of the idea of allowing the increased height, but I believe because the petitioner has shown a willingness to try to meet the city code as close as possible, I'm going to be supporting the motion.
And his amazing ability to find another piece of equipment that worked in the space. So probably found it on some online option, I imagine, making shopping very easy these days. Any other discussion? Okay, so I think we're prepared for a vote. Mr. Evans?
Mr. Eisenbacher,
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Ms. Koopa,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Gauss,
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Motion's approved. Congratulations, you have your variance. Have a good night. Item number B is related to 3821 Lawson. Mr. Evans, can you present on this?
This is for subject property on Lawson. This is a request to allow a proposed addition. This property is located in a neighborhood south of Waddles and east of I-75, specifically on the west side of Lawson. And I have the property outlined there, and the proposed addition is going to be approximately where the blue circle is. And what they want to do is add on a first-story addition to the back of their house, pretty much where the deck is now. And that's indicative of the style that they want to do. That's where the deck is now. Now, this is their plot plan. We have Lawson is at the bottom of this. And the ordinance requires that any additions to the house be set back at least 40 feet from the rear property line, which is the line at the top of this drawing. And the proposed addition is going to be set back whoops, 33.4 feet. So I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Any questions of staff related to this variance request? Seeing none, we'll call forward the petitioner or the petitioner's representative. Good evening. If you can identify yourself and tell us how you're related to the property.
My name is Bill Kolakowski, and I'm a homeowner.
Okay, welcome.
My wife Jody is also listed on here, but is not here. I talked to Mr. Evans in advance and gave permission for her so she could go to our child's school for their curriculum night tonight.
Okay.
I won't go into a lot of detail. If you've read my fairly lengthy statement in there, it covers most of what I wanted to say, but I'll just summarize the main reason that we've made this request is we actually had engaged somebody to prepare the sunroom. It wasn't until I saw in the local paper another notice that I realized, hey, I may have an issue with the setback. And the reason we wanted to do the sunroom is because we've had the deck there for the entirety of our ownership of the home, and unfortunately it's virtually unusable. The temperatures, because we are a west-facing house, the temperatures during the day are extreme, and I put some measurements in there. I took out a thermometer, and this was on a day when the temperature only got up to, I think, 82 was the high, and we had temperature readings on there over 110 degrees on that deck, and it was like that throughout the afternoon. So other than early in the morning or late in the evening, the deck becomes virtually unusable, and that's why we've essentially sought to put the sunroom in to give us some shaded coverage, but with enough airflow. And in terms of a practical difficulty, again, we're a west-facing house, which is obviously going to be true maybe a quarter of the buildings, and not everybody. But in addition, the one thing we have is that with our zoning group, we're in R1B zoning, and my understanding, looking through the articles, that typically at least the minimum lot size for a house of this size is 15,000 square feet. We are, I think, and I'm not sure, it must be the change of time. Our house was built in 1971, I believe. But our lot size is about something, I think I put 13,000 in there somewhere, but that was using the biggest dimensions. If you actually work with the dimensions, it's probably closer to 12,500 square feet. So as compared to a lot of the lots within Troy that are in this zoning group, we don't have the opportunity to expand because our lot size doesn't even meet the minimum lot size requirements for our zoning. So that's kind of our statement of practical difficulty, just as a matter of the appearance of this thing, as shown in the diagram that's on the screen right now, that this sunroom will actually be smaller in footprint than the existing deck that's out there. We also have the approval of all the adjoining lot owners, signed approval, and the homeowners association, which has been submitted. So to my knowledge, nobody's got any objections to it. Obviously, there are other sunrooms in the neighborhood because there are lot sizes that have a little more space than us and have been able to accommodate something within the zoning ordinance, but unfortunately, we can't due to our lot size.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this petitioner?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
So just to clarify, you're going to completely remove the deck and replace it with the sunroom?
Yes.
Okay. And then, did you need to get any permission from your homeowners association?
We do.
Okay, it is.
There's a signed document in the submission that we made.
Okay. So it is the, okay.
Anyone else? Thank you. So at this point in time, we are going to open the public hearing on this matter. If you'd like to address the board on this issue, please come to the podium. Close the public hearing and bring it back to the board table to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher regarding communications from property owners or citizens in the area.
We have the communication from the homeowners association, which is on page 52 of our agenda packet, which is an approval from their president of the homeowners association for Troy Meadows 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then the previous page, there are the 4 adjacent owners have signed for their approval. So
Okay.
5 different approvals and no objections.
Okay, thank you. And we are then going to ask if there's any other further questions by a member of the board, or if someone would like to make a motion.
I'll float a motion out there.
Mr. House.
Due to the size and configuration of the yard being smaller than the minimum size, also being westward facing, motion to grant the variance.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Agawas Desmond for an approval of the petitioner's request. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Evans, I think we're ready for a vote.
Mr. Kaltsunis?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Koopa?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Motion is approved. You have your variance. Have a very good night. So we move on to item number C, which is related to 383 Hickory. Mr. Evans, could you please present on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is property on 383 Hickory is in a single-family neighborhood south of I-75 and east of Livernois. It's on the north side of Hickory, just west of Kirkton. The subject involves a house that is completed, and in the construction process, it was discovered late in the construction process that the house was put slightly closer to the side property lines than it should have been. The zoning ordinance mandates that the house can be as close as 5 feet to any one side property line, but when you add both setbacks of the combined setbacks need to be at least 15 feet. As the house sits, we've got a 4-foot setback on one side and a just over 9-foot setback on the other side. The encroachment doesn't involve the whole house, but does involve some of the house. The board should note that at the time the application was made for the July meeting, there's a different property owner closely associated with the builder. The property has been sold, and now the property owner listed on the application and the agenda are the current occupants, but I believe all parties involved are here tonight in case the board has any questions. So I'll turn it back over to the board.
Thank you. So any questions of staff by a member of the board? Seeing none, Mr. Eisenbacher.
So, looks like you have 2-digit precision on the right side, or on both measurements. So it's exactly 4 feet?
Yeah, that corner's 4 feet. This was done by the surveyor, and they verified the closest point here, and this was 9.07.
So it's a variance for the 4 feet should be 5 feet, and the added together should be 15.
That is correct.
So two items.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Evans, could you address the email message you have from Mitch Grusnick and give us some more background, or essentially read it into the record what he's informed your staff?
Sure. So anyone issuing a building permit in Troy to conduct a new residence is required to submit what we call an as-built foundation plan to ensure the structure will comply with the setback requirements. So what that means is once the foundation is poured, the builder arranges to have a surveyor come in and verify the location of that foundation, and that document is submitted to the city. The city will just take a look at it, and as long as everything complies, they proceed with that. Now, that didn't happen. We did not get anything from the builder until late in the process. So we've got the safeguards in effect, but of course, it looked like something just slipped through the cracks this time.
Mr. Evans, I'm just wondering about precedent in this case. This is kind of interesting because it's more like asking for forgiveness rather than permission. How has the board ruled in similar cases like this in the past?
Very rare, so rare that while I didn't research it, anecdotally, I don't think I could even opine.
Mr. Lambert.
The only thing I can remember within recent history was when the city made a mistake on the setbacks, and we as a board gave the city permission to violate the own code. And I think that was like earlier this year or late last year.
Rochester Road, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, that's coming back to me now, yep.
So next question, this is more hypothetical. If a variance isn't passed, who bears the cost, or what happens next?
The applicant would be required to modify whatever portions of the structure encroach to make it compliant.
So
we know, for example, just to elaborate on that drawing that you see up there now, the south, on the left side, we know that the south 23, well, here's the 5-foot mark right there. So we know that this portion of the house would somehow have to be reduced in width. It's not clear from this drawing how much of this side would need to be reduced.
Yeah, to quote the email from Mr. Gruznek, so like the final sentence in this whole indented paragraph, the stop work notice will remain in effect until the BZA grants a variance of the west exterior wall of the structure is reconstructed to comply with a 5-foot minimum setback. So we have to act, or they have to change it out. So, Mr. Chairman Eisenbacher.
So again, to clarify, looking at it again, if the house were properly positioned, like rotated, would it have passed the, or is it overall too wide for that?
It appears that way because the approved plan on the construction permit, it fits.
Okay.
And I believe the original builder is here and may be able to confirm that.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yes, Ms. Kukla.
So what are the things in place that would have prevented that the builder was required to submit the as-built prior to starting the framework? What was it that we missed?
Well,
That's a whole house that went up.
the builder never submitted anything. And so construction continued. So really both parties were not communicating well. On one hand, construction continued, additional inspections were allowed, construction continued, additional inspections were allowed. But really both parties had an obligation at the time that foundation was put in to say, okay, let's stop, get that survey done so we can all review it. And that's why the process is in place.
Who did the inspections and didn't?
The city, the construction department.
Anyone else? We'll call the petitioner forward. Please identify both of yourselves and your relationship to the property in question.
This is Rekha. I'm the homeowner, and this is the builder, Caesar.
My name is Cesar Pizzo. I built the house with Marianne Rufino's builder's license, who we were partners to build the house. So she currently is not here right now. She is out of town, out of the country. We were here last time, and we were told that she did not have to be in presence to be here. I built the house asking 1-foot variance, and something that it was not an oversight that I didn't see happen. I currently built other homes in the area, and we're actually submitted the as-built always at the same time. I was not aware that I had to submit it after the basement foundation has been turned in. I wasn't aware of it, and I'm not here to say that my mistake. Nobody's brought it to my attention to do that. I'm asking 1-foot variance because if not, the house would actually be a big mistake to do. The house doesn't devalue any homes in the area and doesn't cause any harm in the environment. So that's it.
You said when you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said something about when you wanted to build it, you said something about you asked for it to have 4 feet? What did you ask?
No, did not. I wasn't aware of the problem until we actually did the as-built. I've always done the as-built towards the end. I wasn't aware that I was supposed to do it in the beginning when the foundation was done. If I would have known, it would have been a less expensive to fix at that time.
Okay. Anything else? A member of the board for the petitioner, Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
The building plans, does this match the building plans?
It does.
So
It
the
does not
house
match-
was crooked on
It
the
does not
site?
match the plot plan. It wasn't intended to build it crooked. I assume that somebody made a mistake, weather, or somebody moved the stake. We started building it in November of last year. So I don't know if it was faulty human error, where somebody moved the stake or weather moved it. I don't know. Wasn't aware of it.
So they dug the hole wrong, or they placed the forms wrong?
Don't know. I assume it had to be both.
Okay.
Anyone else for this petitioner? Mr. Lambert?
Mr. Pizzo, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. You're aware of the fact that, and I don't know if the board will approve the variance, but if we do approve it, you still need to put in the 1-hour exterior fire-resistant rated wall for any part that's within that setback area?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, if you can have a seat, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to open the public hearing on this matter. If you'd like to address the board, favor of, in opposition to this matter, please come forward. Yes, good evening. Please identify yourself and your relationship to the property.
Yes, William Van Horn. I live directly across the street, 384 Hickory. I guess I'm against this variance for a number of reasons. We've dealt with the construction there for over 2 years. There's dumpsters there constantly for over 2 years. I don't know if they're building 2 more houses on the corner or not, or which way they're going to face. There's been instances where there's been parking issues and the police have been called and all kinds of other interesting things. There's weeds there taller than my children most of the time. There is no hardship with the property. None. Plenty of room. I guess I have some questions too. So how exactly does a house get built, completed in the city of Troy doesn't meet variances on either side by 2 feet? I would like to know that. And I don't know if there's a fire hazard being closer to the building. I guess something was mentioned with the neighbor to the west. I guess that's why there's setbacks, right? Is that fire and other things? But there's definitely no difficulty with the property itself. And my understanding is that's why we issue variances, because some type of hardship on the property itself. So I guess pieces of the process and approvals were missed. This happens in the city of Troy. How do you go forward, and how do people live there, and how do you get a code of occupancy in the city of Troy? I'm not understanding any of that. I don't know if we have any answers or...
In this format, you have a right to share your opinion about what this board can or should do. This is not a question and answer session of the city administration. We are not the city administration.
Right.
We are your fellow citizens here in the city.
Right.
So you can make a statement, but
I guess
asking question is for Monday through Friday, 8 to whatever it is,
Okay.
at the city hall here. In the proper department, I imagine would be the building department.
Yeah, I did speak to Paul 2 months ago when I originally got the request, but I wasn't able to get half of those answers. So thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Next person.
Good evening, sir.
Evening.
Good evening, everybody. I live kitty corner from the house that was built. I've known Caesar for approximately...
name, sir?
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. My
For the record.
apologies.
For the record.
My name is Harold Dallow.
Thank you.
I can only give you a summation of what I experienced. in sight and in verbal communications. One, I've known Caesar for 8 months. Never at one time did he deliberately wanted to do something out of line. He always had proper intentions. And the people that are moving in there, I consider them of high caliber character. They would be a tremendous asset to the neighborhood and to the city. Also, I also know that the gentleman that made the complaint asked Caesar if he could use his lot because they wanted to tear down a tree. And Caesar complied with that. That gentleman used Caesar's lot to dispose of half the tree, and Caesar gave him the permission. So I ask you, gentlemen, where the phase is, who did what? At this point in time, only one thing matters: the spirit of the law. Just consider the spirit of the law. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to address the board on this matter? Close the public hearing and bring it back to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher on communications.
Okay, we have one communication in the packet on page 62 in favor, or I'm sorry, he's in favor of the upgrades but opposed to the variance, and that is the same one that we have on the table. We had one speaker opposed, one letter opposed, and one speaker in favor.
Okay, thank you. So we will bring it now back to the board table for further discussion, inquiry of our city administration or legal advisor, or for a motion. Mr. Lambert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Motzni, does the city have any liability in this matter because of there have been some miscues or some lack of proper inspections?
There are cases where building permits have been issued and they are due to mistakes, and generally, as long as the city takes action to deal with it, there's no liability. The action here is they're requiring a variance, and so whether or not the variance is granted, there shouldn't be any liability.
Thank you.
Any other member of the board?
I do have a question. Just so I'm clear, are we saying that no inspections were done on this property from the moment they broke ground to its completion, or?
All inspections have been done. As a matter of fact, there is a temporary certificate of occupancy to allow the current owners to occupy, with the exception of the area above the garage that is within the 5-foot setback that's not properly fire rated. So that room is actually walled off and can't be occupied. So the house essentially is being lived in. It has been inspected. All required inspections have been done. Now we're just waiting to see if the house is going to remain where it is, if modifications need to be done. Any portions of the house that are with less than 5 feet from the side property line are going to need an upgraded fire rating, and that was the important aspect that the city considered when we did issue the temporary C of O.
So did that just never get caught at foundation inspection, that the entire foundation had been misaligned on the property? Is that?
Well into the process. After the roof was on, I think it was sometime in July. Right before our July meeting, I received an application. I can't remember if it was June or July, right near the deadline. So it was caught.
But they had already got the foundation, had been inspected and passed and everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's substantial construction.
Okay, all right.
Substantial.
So, okay, that's my main question was, what, is this a negligent situation where they intentionally avoided having inspectors come through and then the house is done and now they want to occupy it? Okay, all right, thank you.
I think what happened is the city, all the plans were approvable without a variance, and this one step wasn't taken by either party.
Okay.
When we found out, it was very close to being finished.
All right, thank you.
Any other member of the board like to be recognized? So, Mr. Evans, could you do an overview about if this is, I'm not really trying to telescope any punch here, I'm just kind of just curious. What would happen if this wasn't disposed of in the petitioner's favor tonight? Namely, they'd have to reconstruct that area, is my guess, right?
The portions of the house that are encroach into the setback would have to be modified in a fashion so they do not encroach.
And that goes all the way down into the foundation, which it's a major amount of work.
It wouldn't be the foundation, but ultimately it may include modifying the foundation.
Yeah.
And we've had, our building officials met with Mr. Pizzo. He might be able to give you more details to exactly what would be necessary because they're more familiar with what's there now. But yeah, regarding the foundation, it is plausible that portions of those foundations might have to be adjusted or added onto, so anything above grade doesn't extend where it shouldn't be.
So, who's the neighbor on that side of the home? I guess that's the, from our renderings to the left of that. Do we have an address? Do we have any idea of, maybe the, you can't call out from the chamber, sir. Can I call up the petitioner's representative or petitioner? And do we have a communication? You have to come to the microphone, so yeah, please do not call out. The address on the affected side, the 4-foot side.
What address would that be?
369. So your house is
369.
here?
Do we have a communication, Mr. Eisenbacher?
No.
Has the owner spoken with that property owner? And?
I spoke to them.
You have?
They were aware of it. One of them was okay with it. The other one wasn't because I couldn't talk to him because he didn't speak English. The house on 391 is currently mine.
It's currently what?
I own it.
Okay. Well, we don't have an official communication, and I'm sorry, I personally can't just take your word for that, but I would have thought that would have been in the petitioner's interest to have a signed letter to this board on that matter.
On 369 address, correct?
Well, yeah, 4 feet
Okay.
apart. Come on, right?
Yes.
So that's that. Okay, thank you. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
Item D in our statement of practical difficulty. The characteristics which make compliance with dimensional requirements difficult must not have been created by the current or a previous owner.
Right. And I think that's certainly, I don't think the homeowner woke up one morning and said she wanted this happening
No.
to her property, but her hired contractor did it, so that
Okay,
is
so
her. in
we're
a
saying that it was created by the digger of the hole and the
petitioner, the property owner. So I'll bring it back to my colleagues. Someone would like to take some action here. No, sir, you cannot call out from the audience, nor can you share at this time. It's back to the board table. And if you had spoken to a neighbor, you could have shared that earlier, and your word doesn't mean that you spoke to that person. Sorry. That's that's the reason we have written communication. So we have a formal piece of paper or electronic communication in front of us. Mr. Lambert.
This is a tough situation, and because I don't think anyone intentionally wanted to violate the ordinance, it was probably some type of a mistake that occurred. But we have a situation where there's been no practical difficulty given to us to grant the variance. And also in consideration of the next door neighbor, who we don't know what their opinion is, I'm going to move to deny the variance.
Motion for denial of the petitioner's request. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Agawas.
I would like to suggest make a different motion? Is that possible?
No, we have a motion in front of us.
You can amend.
What you can do, as your parliamentarian consultant, is you can move to amend the motion. Or this could be voted on up or down, and if it perhaps fails, then you could make another motion. It's really up to you.
Could we amend the motion to postpone it, to allow the petitioner to collect additional neighbors' approval of the variance?
You can make that motion.
And I would like to amend the motion to allow the petitioner to collect additional neighbors' opinions or comments about the variance, about granting the variance.
Okay, there's a motion to amend the motion in front of us, so it becomes the main motion if it's seconded. Is there a second to Ms. Koopa's motion?
I second it.
Mr. Kalsunas seconds that. So that's now before this board to postpone. Do we have to a date certain?
To our next meeting?
Is that amenable to the seconder of the motion? To our next meeting, sir? Mr. Kalsunas?
Yes.
Okay. So that's now the main motion, that this be postponed to allow the petitioner to collect more information from neighbors, including, fellow or neighbor property owners. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'll just say that I will be willing to vote in favor of this here tonight, but as my comment to the petitioner or her representative, I won't accept an address and with a check mark next to it. We would like to see a communication from a person saying this one vote, would like to see that. A communication is anything. I'm saying this particular member of this board would like to see a written statement from that person, and my fellow colleagues can choose to interpret any future communication the way they want to see it. That's what I would consider. When you consider the fact that there is only 4 inches or 4 feet of separation from that building to that property line, I would say that that's significant, even though 5 apparently is acceptable, but 4 is very small, in my opinion. So when this comes, I believe this probably will pass. We'll see here in a second, but that's what I'm going to factor in regarding my future vote. Any other discussion? See none, Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared to vote for a vote on the amendment, which would then literally change the final motion to this if it passes.
Okay. Ms. Koopa?
I vote for the postponement.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunas?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Motion passes. Now on to the main motion, which is, it essentially changes Mr. Lambert's motion of denial to a future vote before the board on the final answer to the question. So, Mr. Evans, a yes would essentially move this again to our October agenda.
So yes to postpone?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it yes to deny? Is that what we're doing now? Yes to postpone. All right, just checking.
Her motion, the Koopa motion,
Okay.
essentially just punts it to October.
Okay.
And then it'll come back before us
Yes.
as a motion to deny.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Agawas?
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunas?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Koopa?
Yes.
Okay, so this is on our October agenda. That motion is approved.
Right. The city will not be sending out additional notices to homeowners. Our next meeting is October 17th.
And I think that the spirit of that motion for anyone in the room, I know we had one other homeowner before us here tonight who spoke. So anyone can submit any further communication. It doesn't mean that it's just the petitioner or the petitioner's representative. Any person could come back in the October meeting with more information
Or you could,
to the board.
or you could submit that to the planning office before the meeting, and we can get it in the packet.
Yes, yes. And then that, if it's submitted to the planning office, then it will be in our packet. So And that goes for anyone on this issue or any future issue. So now we move on to item number D, and that is related to 3459 Talbot. Mr. Evans, could you please present on this? So anyone who was here this evening for that motion, or that item, C, we're done with it for tonight, so I'm sorry, I don't see anyone moving. God bless you if you want to watch the rest of the proceedings, but you can go. So, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for a variance request for property address at 3459 Talbot. This property is located in a single-family neighborhood north of Big Beaver and east of Livernois. It's on the west side of Talbot, outlined there in red. There's a close-up of the property. All the surrounding property is zoned single-family residential with the exception of the dog park, which is just southwest of the property, and that's zoned for recreation. Now, the applicant's submitting to add on to the house. Now, this is their site plan, and the street is to the right side. I've outlined the existing house, and in blue I've outlined the proposed garage, which is going to extend to the front of the house. Now, the ordinance requires that the addition to the house be set back 25 feet from the front property line along Talbot, and the house is, the garage is proposed to be 20.5 feet set back. And they're also going to go up with the addition, but this front illustration shows the portion from the street, how it'll look, that's going to be needing a variance. I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Any questions for the city staff?
Mr. Evans, I think I saw this in an email from the petitioner, but has this variance request come before the board a couple prior times and been approved already in some similar shape?
No, the variance requests were different.
Okay.
So this property has been before the board, but there are different variance requests.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll call the petitioner forward. So please state both of your names and your relationship to the property in question.
My name is Amir Bichet, and this is my wife, Florian.
I'm Florian Bichet. I'm the property owner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So do you want to present to us?
Sure. I guess on a lighter note, it's good to see you all here. So thank you for that. Just to, as Paul emphasized, this variance was technically approved back in 2012 and 2014 for the, or 2015, I believe, for the front yard setback. The difference is that the proposed garage location is mirrored. Now it's on the, let me think about that, the north quadrant of the property line, where previously it was on the south quadrant. So in essence, the variance request is the same, but the location and obviously the addition of the second level is the variance of the variance, so to speak. You guys are all business. Okay. I think there's another rendering that shows you what was previously approved compared to what's proposed today.
They've gotten that in their packet.
Okay.
Everything you submitted was given to them in their packet. These are select slides.
So the overall intent, just to give you a little context if you're not looking at the narrative, is that the intent was to move the proposed garage to the east quadrant of the property line to avoid as much earthwork and impact to the 100-year floodplain, and that's probably your recollection of this previous variance before you. The current location that allows us to avoid some of the penetrations for some of the utilities. You'll notice that the water lead and the sewer lead come in almost kind of a beam or in the middle of the existing structure there. Moving the garage to the north allows us to mitigate or prevent the penetrations through the foundation there. It also reduces the overall footprint, the overall impact to the floodplain. It reduces the amount of earthwork required. It also increases the green space between the neighbor to the south there. And then, as Paul mentioned, the dog park has a lot of,
There's no neighbor on the north side,
yeah.
and there's a neighbor on the south side.
It also maintains the architectural sequencing, if you will, house garage with some of the other houses that are on the street. That's it. I don't know if that it's a comprehensive enough overview, but.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Lambert?
Just one. Looking at the plans, it looks like you're also preserving a tree on the property by having the garage on the north rather than on the south.
Yeah, it prevents some tree removal as well.
We have a huge, I don't know what it is, tree in front, yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else for these petitioners? You can have a seat. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Open the public hearing on the matter. If you are here on this item for the board, please step forward. Identify yourself. Seeing that we don't have any customers, we're going to close the public hearing and bring it back to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
And I have nothing in the packet for or against this request.
No further communications. Okay, and so now we move it back to the board table for further questions or action. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
If I may, this, except for the fact that it's not an irregularly shaped parcel, I believe all the items apply. The thing that does apply is the environmental issues with saving the tree, the mature tree, and avoiding the flood issues. But I would like to move the item for approval.
Second.
Eisenbacher and Desmond move approval. Is there any discussion by a member of the board? Seeing that we don't have any. So just a really quick question of the author of the motion is, did you want to put anything in there about making sure that the trees are protected? No.
No, it's in their interest to do that.
I understand. I'm saying that you could add it in if you wanted to. Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Evans, I believe we can vote on this.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher?
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Koopa?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes, motion is approved. Congratulations. Have a good night. And it was only an extra hour and 2 minutes of your time, plus travel. Sorry about that, folks. Take care. Item number E is related to 2870 Marcus. Mr. Evans, could you please present on this for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The subject property is a single-family home south of Big Beaver and west of DeQuinder. South side of Marcus Street there, the triangular-shaped parcel, 2870. And they're proposing to add a pergola to cover the existing deck on the back of the house. I've circled the approximate area in the aerial here. And this is a rendering of what the proposed pergola would look like. It's going to go on top of the attached deck. And this is their site plan. It's flipped around, but the back of the house is at the top of this. Now, the zoning ordinance requires that the pergola be set back 35 feet from the back property line. The closest point of the proposed pergola is going to be 30 feet from the rear property line. So I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Questions of staff? Seeing none, we will call the petitioner forward. Please identify yourself in relationship to the property in question.
Yes, my name is James Hall, Fund Space Direct, 20400 Hall Road, Clinton Township, Michigan, 48038. I am the contractor for Ms. Novak.
Good evening.
Good evening. Ms. Novak would like to put a pergola on the back of her house. Pre-existing in the 80s, she had a sunroom back there. Over the years, it had deteriorated and was leaking. They could not correct that leak, so she had it tore down. Investigating with the city, I found that it was properly permitted at that time, and the existing sunroom was the exact same size of what we're trying to replace with this pergola. I could not find any record that a variance had been granted, although the existing area is exactly what we're looking at. So at that time, it was 30 feet from the backyard at that time. The pergola is not as intrusive as a sunroom. There are no walls. It's a see-through product. The lot itself is very irregular. It's very deep on the one side, 189 feet. The other side, it's only about 111 feet, 112 feet. So it causes that back area to really cut in close to the house. The variance is not actually asking for the whole back 5 feet of that pergola. It's only that just small corner, which is kind of that southwest corner. The homeowner gets, since she took away the sunroom, she gets south sun all day long. She just would like to get a little shade on that back porch.
Okay, thank you. Anyone for the petitioner's representative? If you could have a seat, thank you very much. Now we'll open the public hearing on the matter. If you're here to address the board on this matter, please step to the podium. Seeing that we don't have anyone interested in speaking to us on that matter, we'll close the public hearing and move our action back to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher. Any communications on this matter?
No communications on this matter in the packet or on the table or received by email.
Perfect. All right, now we're back to the board table, and are there questions of staff, or would someone like to take some action? Mr. Lambert.
I'm going to move to approve the variance. Looking at our statement of practical difficulty, the exceptional characteristics of the property are unusual shape, which is letter A. Letter B is they must not be related for the dimensional requirements must be related to the premises, not some other location, which is clear. C, the characteristics shall not be of a personal nature. They're related to the unusual configuration of the property. D, they were not created by the current or previous owner. And then E, will not harm or change the essential characteristics of the neighborhood.
Motion has been made. Is there a second? Ms. Koopa. Any discussion on this matter? My discussion is to Ms. Koopa, and I would just recommend to you as our planning commissioner in bed that the planning commission look at a broader comprehensive look at pergolas, because it's, we've seen a lot of action in the last couple of years, and it came out of nowhere. It was like no one was coming before this board, and then all of a sudden we don't have them every month, and clearly not every other month, but it's more common, and obviously they're popular. And I think obviously for something like this picture here, it's such a non-invasive to the neighborhood or to the neighbors type of structure, and especially to the homeowner here who actually had a sunroom with walls and structure. This is a structure clearly, but it's a very minimal structure, and people could pop something similar to it in the middle of their lawn and not have to get approval, like a temporary one. So I would really like the planning commission to take a look at that, make some possible changes or what have you over a period of time. Just some thoughts on my part.
I also wanted to commend the application itself. This one was really well done because they went through our procedure and they laid out A, B, C, D, E, and I just thought it was easy to read and easy to follow as compared to some of the other applications that have come our way.
Anyone else? Okay, so Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
So hopefully your client will have fun with that fun space that you're going to build for her. So the motion is approved. Congratulations, your client has her variance, and have a good night. Thank you. You're welcome. Now on to the final item. We're here related to 5600 New King. Mr. Evans, could you please present?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This office building is located on the west side of Crooks, south of I-75 and just north of the I-75 exit ramp. Subject property and all surrounding property is zoned a host of office or commercial. Subject property is located on 3 streets, New King, Crooks, and I can't read what that other one is, but the one to the north. And the zoning ordinance does qualify that any yard abutting a street is considered a front yard. So in this instance, this property does have 3 front yards, and that was a change from the old, I shouldn't say that was a change, but the requirement to have parking in the front yard is a change in addition to the new zoning ordinance that went into effect in 2011. So what they're requesting is to expand parking to the west. So this is the existing layout now. That's their site plan. And this area here is the area of change. They want to add parking spaces here and also put in a swale here, but the subject matter of the variance involves adding additional parking in the front yard along New King. So I'll turn it back over to the board for any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Evans. Anyone for city staff? Mr. Lambert.
Just one quick question. The parking change, is it being necessitated by city ordinance for an additional number of parking spaces, or is it just the owner wants to just reconfigure the parking site?
It's owner choice. It's not related to any ordinance change or any addition to the building. And I'm sure they can elaborate on that.
Anyone else? We'll call the petition, Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
It appears that there's a lot of buildings right along Big Beaver where the front yard is used for parking. Is this a different zoning district than much of the city, or is
Yes,
it?
a substantial portion of Big Beaver, especially between I-75 and the former Kmart World headquarters, has been rezoned to the Big Beaver form-based zone. Previously, it was zoned different categories that would allow the parking in the front yard. But with the new form-based codes, that's not allowed anymore, and that would be included with this district here, in the RC district.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, call the petitioner forward. Mr. Warren Hudson, I assume?
It's me. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Warren Hudson, appearing on behalf of Friedman Management Company, as well as 5600 New King LLC. So just a brief history of the site. My company took over the 8 former EDS buildings about 5 years ago. We've spent a ton of money and effort rehabbing those buildings and filling them up with Class A tenants that are an asset both to us and to the city of Troy. We're appearing before the board tonight asking for a variance to allow parking in a front yard. When you look at the map that we've provided, you'll see that we have what could best be described as a unique lot, given that we have New King on 2 sides and then Crooks on the other side. So effectively, everything that we have is a front yard, and then the south of the building we have a detention pond. Because Troy doesn't allow parking in any front yard, we're before the board. We're sort of a product of our own success. We've done such a good job filling these buildings up. We have a demonstrable lack of parking at this building. We've got a variety of tenants, and a couple of them have a lot of people who work off-site. When they're all on-site for meetings, there's just not enough parking. If you go to this site in the middle of the week, when those tenants have everybody in the building, there's just no spots left. So we worked really carefully with our engineers to figure out something that would match the site and wouldn't impact the neighbors greatly. Does anybody have any questions on what we're proposing?
Okay, Mr. Agawes.
Question, just out of curiosity, what's your occupancy rate right now at that building?
You know, I don't have the rent roll in front of me. The building is relatively full. We do have some space that we'd like to lease there I think we'll have trouble leasing if we can't get some more additional parking, but even without that small chunk of space, we have a problem with the building as it is.
So how many more additional spots?
I believe the building is in the neighborhood of 80,000 feet, and we probably have 10 to 15 left to fill the building.
No, I'm not saying offices. I'm saying how many total new parking spots. That's okay.
I apologize. The net increase from what we're doing here is 75 spaces. So we've added some spaces along the building to the right of the main parking field, and then the existing parking lot, we've moved the westerly lot line, or the westerly parking line towards the curb, and we've added more spaces to each row of parking. So the net delta is 75.
Anyone else for the petitioner? All right, you can have a seat, please.
Thank you very much.
So we are going to go to Vice Chairman Eisenbacher just to change it up. Any communications on this
No.
matter? Thank you very much. So now we'll open the public hearing. And if you're here on this item for the board, please step forward to the podium to address us. Seeing that we don't have anyone who would like to address us on this matter, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for further questions or possible action. Vice Chairman Eisenbacher.
This is a very reasonable request that does meet our criteria. The lot is obviously unique insofar as it has 3 front yards. There's very few properties that have that status in Troy. Going through the list of practical difficulties, for A, it is that 3 front yards being in irregular shape relative to the roads. B, it is for this location. C, this is not personal, this is related to the land. D, characteristics were not created by the owner, it was created by the road surrounding the property. And E, the variance is not harmful to the surrounding neighbors, and it will not have a negative impact, and it will have a positive impact on the people working in the building.
There's a motion for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Desmond seconds. So under discussion, I'd like to recall the petitioner's representative just really quickly, and just please describe to me in the affected area, the red box. I see to the north there, it looks like those are trees. I see just south of there, perhaps some shrubbery. Is this all existing plant life, or is this going to be added in?
Everything that's dark on that plan is proposed. So the swale to manage the stormwater, that is proposed, that is not currently existing. The planting along New King to the west is proposed, not existing. I think actually, Paul, if you go back one slide, yeah, you'll see. So there's very little, there's no trees there right now. So we're adding quite a bit of shrubbery along New King, as well as some trees when you're coming into the property.
So, Mr. Evans, if you can go back to the one we were just looking at. So these here, those are like trees or shrubs at the end of a row, correct?
Correct. Those are trees that are planted at the end of the row.
So essentially you have here a break, and then you have a break here again.
Correct.
And then to the north there, two different breaks.
Correct.
Okay. Because that's like my biggest gripe about, you need parking. People need to come and go, and with people with different schedules, it's difficult to carpool. But at the end of the day, a sea of asphalt or concrete is just not visually pleasing, and it looks like you've done a pretty good job. Can you just finally just give me an overview of what kind of plant life would be involved?
I think the plan on the screen right now is essentially our tree survey, and I don't know that I have the entire landscape plan. Actually, I do have the plan. So there's sugar maples, crab apples, Cleveland Select pears, perennials. So in the bioswale, which is sort of up a little bit, there are daylilies, native grasses, and perennials in that entire area.
Okay. It looks like they did a really good job with that plan.
We did as much as we could. We know that landscaping and the eco portion is important to the city of Troy, and it's important to us too. We want to be good citizens and break this as much as we can. We know that we're adding a lot of asphalt, but so we did as much planting as we possibly could here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Mr. Evans, I believe we're prepared for a vote.
Mr. Eisenbacher.
Yes.
Mr. Kaltsunis.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Koopa.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Agawas.
Yes.
Mr. Desmond.
Yes.
Congratulations, you have your variance.
Thank you.
Have a very good night.
Thank you very much.
So now we move on to communications. Are there any communications to the board, Mr. Evans? Now on to miscellaneous business, which is really anything that the board would like to talk about, or from city staff. Any other matters? Mr. Mosny, no. Okay, we then move on to public comment. If you're here to address the board on any matter, you have the right to do that now at the podium. So we will, we don't have any takers on that, so we will close that out. Is there any other matter that a board member would like to talk about that's pertinent to the board? Mr. Lambert.
Just one item, and I think we went through this a couple of years ago when we, might be more than a couple of years ago, when we drafted or revised the bylaws for the zoning board, that maybe we need to take another look at those since it should be done on a regular basis. And maybe we could figure out to do it at a meeting where there's maybe only one item on the agenda, if we could count on our able Mr. Evans to look out for our interests in that matter.
Sure, we can see if we can, so when we have a later agenda, we can add the review onto that.
And I also have a request. I noticed this time that we have the zoning ordinance section. Is there a way that we could have like a zoning ordinance 101 at one of our lighter meetings? Because we had a wide range. We had a 703B, a 406C, and the zoning district was an R1B on one and an R1E on another. We had a 4.18D. So I just thought it was very interesting to see the range, and I'm not familiar with the terms, so if we could have just a 101 on what they are and what they mean.
Yeah, and what I can do is talk to Brent Sabadan, the planning director, and maybe he can stop in at one of our meetings and just give a purview. Plus, he works closely with the Planning Commission as well, which I know you're on, and I think he could give a nice zoning 101, so I'll talk to him.
Next week I am going to the Michigan Planning Conference, so hopefully I will come back brighter and more knowledgeable about these things, but I'm going to be becoming a certified or take my certification in classes while I'm there. So.
I'm going too, and so is Director Sabadan.
Yes.
Sounds like we have some agenda items for a later agenda that would result perhaps in our December meeting from actually happening.
I think we have two for sure in October, yeah.
Knowing full well we've had some issues last year of even having a December meeting because of lack of business.
I have one question for you, and that is when we ask people to come to the podium and state their name, do we not ask, because I've seen in other scenarios where we ask for both their first and last name and their address? And do they have to write it down? Because in a lot of other scenarios, when you offer comment, you have to also, you have a clipboard and you have to put your address on there.
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Evans address this because there have been changes to this board based on, I believe, the law, and maybe Mr. Mazzi could address it. But we have had some changes since I've been on here.
Well, I think the main change is now we've got the luxury of having videos. As a matter of fact, our minutes have even changed, where we used to kind of give more of a play-by-play, including who spoke and where they lived. Now, and I believe the video is the most accurate representation of exactly what happened. You can glean a lot more from a video than you ever could from the meeting minutes. So I think the chairman does an excellent job of establishing at least, okay, who are you and where do you live, so we understand who's speaking. I think we've got essentially the same amount of information where, you know, okay, well, who was that person who spoke? Well, we know he's the neighbor who lives next door, and his name's Joe Smith. That's my thought on it, but that explains the change and why.
We'll ask people to sign in at the Planning Commission.
We ended that when we got the video cameras. So that used to be part of the record. Now we ask it, and the video record is the record. So, and then of course, I always ask, you know, please identify yourself and your relationship to the property. So I think I heard one person here tonight say, well, I live across the street. If, I think that's fine to me, but if a member wanted a specific address, a member could ask.
Sure.
At any time. Because like, for instance, the one piece of business we dealt with, I mean, I really wanted to know, did we have a communication from that property owner? I didn't care as much about people from across the street, just to drill down on that. And if people had been here and no one said, yeah, I'm the property owner to the affected side, then I would have maybe asked, further. But we used to ask specifically for the addresses.
We would, and that would be put in the minutes.
Right.
For example, that list doesn't become part of the meeting minutes. It's not
Right.
part of the record. It's just helped to reconstruct the accurate meeting
Video
minutes.
record.
Well, since we have I forgot the name, but basic minutes now, action item, it's action minutes is what they're called. We don't have a need to write someone's name and address in the meeting minutes. So as long as the video portrays who it is, it suffices.
Mr. Mazzini, do you have anything to add?
Just that the Open Meetings Act, the requirements are not that stringent. You don't have to have people sign in. In fact, if someone wants to speak and they refuse to give their name, you should let them speak anyway. Otherwise, we face an Open Meetings Act violation. So.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know what board I served on years ago, but I remember hearing from an attorney on that matter that if you ask somebody where they live, they have a right to speak if it's an open communication period of time, even if they're from California. And that may sound weird, but they can walk in, and it's even so open that if you're taking testimony on 123 Brown Street wanting a variance, to build a shed right on the property line, they could walk up to the microphone and talk about the president's speech at the UN today, which is not related at all to your action item, but they have a legal right to do that, which sounds very counterintuitive, but I guess when we have the First Amendment, that's that, and there have been a lot of court rulings in that regard, so that's, anything else from anyone? Okay. We are adjourned until October.